All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our March information session here today. These information sessions are monthly, excluding the summer, brought to you by the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network. And today we are talking about migratory birds and avian influenza. We thought this was apt timing as it is spring and our migratory birds will be headed back to the state here soon. So we'll be talking about highly pathogenic avian influenza, and we have two special guests here today. A couple of reminders for if you have called in on Zoom, please remain muted until we have a Q&A at the end of our presentations. You can also use the chat feature to post any questions that you may have during the presentation. And if you have called in on your phone, please mute yourself. You can do that by pressing *6 to mute yourself on a phone. And you can press *6 again to unmute yourself when we do our questions at the end. And just so everyone's aware, this session is being recorded and the recording will be available on our website in about a week or two. And I guess I'll introduce myself as well. My name is Caitlin Demoski, and I am one of the Tribal Climate Resilience Liaisons that is a part of our Tribal Resilience Learning Network team. I am based in Palmer usually, but right now I'm calling in from Juneau or Tlingit land. Land acknowledgement here for our Tribal Resilience Learning Network team. We're spread across the state, including Trothyada campus in Fairbanks at UAF, Denina Ethnena in Anchorage and the surrounding area, Quinnahock out in Southwest, and Tlingit lands in Juneau. So our team is across the state. A little bit of background for the Tribal Resilience Learning Network. We are a part of the Climate Adaptation Science Center, which is housed at UAF in Fairbanks. We provide one-on-one technical assistance and check-in calls. We do monthly learning network calls as well as these monthly information sessions that you're calling into right now. We also have an e-bulletin or a listserv that you can sign up for to get updates on what we're doing, the trainings and workshops that we're providing, and any relevant job positions or funding opportunities that are available for tribes in the state. And there is our website below. And for now, we'll go ahead and get into our presentations here. I'd like to welcome Dr. Tolani Francisco, who is a veterinarian contractor with the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, who is my employer and a partner with the Tribal Resilience Learning Network. And we're also welcoming Chuck Menadelook, who is the Subsistence Resources Program Director with Kawerak. And could go ahead and pass it off to you, Tolani.
Wonderful. I'm going to start sharing my screen with everyone. So hopefully, can I get a thumbs up if everybody can see that, the presentation? Okay, so Goati Hope Asokini, Tolani Francisco, Go e Mahame, Shashkanini. So I am from the Pueblo of Laguna, which is one of the 19 pueblos in the state of New Mexico. So I'm quite a bit farther south than you all in Alaska. I've been to your beautiful state, and what a beautiful state it is for a desert dweller, though for me, that's a lot of snow you guys deal with. And you guys have some cold temperatures. But what I want to talk to you today about Highly pathogenic avian influenza. That's a mouthful. I understand that. But we're going to just kind of go forward and talk about a few questions that we want to ask. Let me get over here. See if I can get it to advance. There we go. So 3 questions in the amount of time that I have to speak to you today. We want to, first of all, I think a lot of us are like, what is HPAI? Highly pathogenic avian influenza. Why should we be concerned about it? It's been around for a long time. We've heard about it for a long time. And what are some of the things that we might be able to do about it? So that was the whole kind of premise for speaking today, is kind of looking at answering those 3 questions. So the first question, what is highly pathogenic avian influenza? And this is a very busy slide. I understand that, but you will have access to it. And there is a link down at the bottom you can see of this, that I took it off the internet, because this is probably the slide that explains the most. So HPAI is a type A influenza virus, okay? Just about everybody in the audience has probably had the flu at some point in their lives. And we know that, like the Spanish flu pandemic that happened back in 1918, that killed a lot of people. It's a virus. It is definitely a virus. But what we see here that is really particularly of interest is our little duck here in the middle. So we see wild waterfowl, ducks, geese, all of that thing. What is really important for those of you that are mathematicians, I want somebody to think about this, is that this particular virus is made up of 2 primary proteins, the neuraminidase protein and the hemagglutinin protein. Now, and each one of them, as you can see in the slide, is given a different kind of specificity to a type of mammal or avian species that it affects primarily. So you see the H1 and then the N1. And if you're a mathematician, I want you guys to think, how many combinations of this particular virus can we have if we have 16 different hemagglutinin proteins and 9 different neuraminidase proteins? So what that means, and you see on the screen here, that you can have an H4 compared with an H1 through an H9. You can have an H1 that goes H1, pair it with an N1 through N9. So now you're seeing the vast variety of viruses that are all of this type, that are all pathogenic, avian influenza pathogens, and the different hosts that they are typically associated with. Now, why is this really of a concern to us? Because you see our friend in his business suit in this picture. These are all zoonotic diseases, meaning that they can be transmitted back and forth between humans and animals. And you see that in the red circle off to, if you're looking at the screen, it should be your left, or yeah, your right. You see that we have got swine, human, the turkey. Those are the big ones. But we're also seeing many now that are with different hosts that are particularly concerned, and we're going to talk about that. So I want you guys to really concentrate on this slide, because even though it's a busy slide, look at all the variety of animals that are affected with this virus. And you can see at the top is some of our sea mammals, the seal, we've got whales, you can see the whale at the bottom, but there are many, and they all go back and forth with our little waterfowl friends, okay? So that's what really makes this important, is because it has such a wide variety of hosts or animals that it can affect. So we've talked about the multiple species you saw on the slide before, and that zoonotic potential. Now, that gets into the people saying, well, you know what, if I'm not handling birds, if I'm not looking at birds, why am I concerned about getting infected myself? Well, as native people, we tend to use a lot of what is in our environment, right? I know that with my people down here in New Mexico, ducks are used in duck feathers. We're utilitarian people. All parts of the duck are used in our kiva ceremonies and in many of our religious ceremonies. And you can see with this gentleman here in his powwow outfit, he got a lot of feathers on it, right? So a lot of our traditional utility or traditional uses use all parts of birds and many different birds. So the birds, as Caitlin was saying, you know, this is springtime, the birds are starting to move. And I know that here in New Mexico, we've already seen the sandhill cranes that spend the whole winter down here loving the New Mexico sun. They've already gone. They're back headed towards the north. Many of the ducks and some of the geese and other species, they're heading northward right now. And so we're seeing a large migration. And in a lot of times, what happens is our native people are out harvesting these animals because they're unique. We see them maybe once or twice a year, most of the time, twice a year, and then they're gone. And so we utilize what we can when we catch them. And so the feathers are used in a lot of different ceremonies. A lot of people eat these different animals, you know, and I know duck meat and a lot of different wild birds are consumed, as well as are many of the eggs. And a lot of people don't realize that. So we have both traditional uses and ceremonial uses. And I put the traditional use more as kind of what I guess the outside world looks at as, you know, consumption of like, you know, people that go duck hunting and they bring the ducks home and they eat them, or they, you know, go and go quail hunting and pheasant hunting and things like that. And they're just eating the meat of those animals. And then you've got our special ceremonial uses that are not known to others outside of our different tribal communities. And so we can't really speak about those and how that is used. So that's why I think it's something very concerning that we look at how we use the different animals and realize that in each one of our communities is going to be different. There are going to be things that we are not going to be able to change because of the ceremonial use or, you know, things like that. And so we have to be kind of cognizant of some of that. So we get into our third question then is, so what do we do, or what can be done about highly pathogenic avian influenza and its, you know, potential for zoonoses into humans, and then humans giving it back to these animals? So the very first thing, and I have it in bold letters here, is biosecurity. And a lot of people say, what is biosecurity? Is that wearing, you know, gloves and a face mask? And I know a lot of us coming out of COVID, we're familiar with face masks and things like that, using hand sanitizer. And that is part of biosecurity. But I guess more specifically, what I try to have people understand is that we're not just protecting ourselves, but we also have to protect our animals that we have in our homes. So when we have these birds that are migrating, we can't allow any wild birds into commercial poultry barns. And that's a big thing down here in the lower 48, because, you know, we have like Iowa, Minnesota, where they might have 60,000 birds in one barn, and they're producing, chicken eggs for us to consume. If it's a broiler barn, that's where we get our chickens that you buy in the grocery store, or the canned meat that you get in canned chicken. And we know that chicken is a very much consumed protein source. So we have to protect those commercial industries. We don't want to be feeding wild birds if you have a backyard flock. I know a lot of people now have backyard chickens. They like to grow their own eggs. They might have geese or ducks in their backyard. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to be commingling the birds that are migrating, because a lot of these birds will not appear sick, but they will have the virus, and it'll be coming out in their feces and their urine. And so we have to be conscious about what could be transmitted from these wild birds as they're moving and intermingling with our backyard flocks. So we definitely want to discourage that commingling. If you are handling wild birds for any reason, whether you're a biologist out in the forest, in the bush that is, you know, sampling, or you're doing something else out in the bush, maybe you're harvesting, you know, berries or, you know, different types of things, you need to look at disinfecting your clothing and certainly any equipment that you use. So a simple rinse off with a Clorox solution, it's like 1 part Clorox and 10 parts of water. That is very dilute, but it will kill the virus. Okay, you don't want to wipe it off right away. You want to let it sit for about 5 minutes, and then you can, you know, finish washing it off with something else. But you definitely want to be sanitizing, disinfecting and sanitizing your any clothing and equipment that comes in contact with something that a wild bird might have left, whether it's the bird itself or their feces or anything like that. We mentioned keeping poultry away from other farm animals. Now that's a tough one. A lot of folks have, you know, small hobby farms, and I see this all the time as a veterinarian when I go out to different premises. Somebody will have you know, four lambs or goats. They'll have a pig. They might have a horse. They probably have dogs and cats running around the yard, and then they have all their poultry. So they have chickens and geese and maybe some guinea fowl, and they're all just in the yard, and they're all living happily ever after, right? But really that commingling of all those species, it's stressful on that animal, and it's also a great place to mix your viruses and your bacteria, all your pathogens. So I tell people this. I know it looks great, and we all want to have like a little, you know, Garden of Eden farm, but that's really not a very safe thing to do. So it's good to be able to keep your animals separate. There's 2 good things about that. Number 1, you can feed them separately, and you know who's eating what. And then number 2, you can clean up after them. So the waste, we know that we all eat something and something comes out, right? So you need to be able to clean up that waste from each one of the animals and not let one animal consume another animal's waste, because that is another way that we can transmit these viruses around. The last thing is the eggs. So if you're in production, you have your backyard flock because you like to produce your own eggs, it really is beneficial. I know a lot of folks don't like to wipe the eggs off, but you really should be wiping the eggs down, and you should not be eating partially raw eggs. You definitely don't want to eat a fully raw egg, but you know, eggs that are not fully cooked are very dangerous. So an egg, just like any other protein, should always reach 165. That means the yolk, sorry to tell you this, but that yolk should be well done when you're consuming it. And then I have down here that we can educate and report. So we can educate our fellow Native people out in communities and stuff, and we can report any suspicions that suspicious activity that we have, or things that are not coming around that look like normal. And this is where it's really handy to have some of your elders that know some of this, because a lot of our younger folks aren't maybe as educated because they weren't exposed to it as much as some of us older folks were. So I have this slide up because when it comes to response processes, whether it's from the state, whether it's a tribal response, or whether it's a federal response to a animal disease, what happens is the disease is detected or it's suspected, and that it occurs in a certain area. So like right now, this HPAI, believe it or not, folks, it's been going on since 1996. That was the first time we really detected it, and it was in Hong Kong. And so since then, the US government has done a lot to educate tribal leadership and government, state governments and all of that. So we want to go into the educating portion. And that's what we're doing today, is kind of educating ourselves and then continuing that education, because these things change. So that people are aware of what to look for, what to be, on the lookout for. Then the disease or condition is actually detected in your area. Okay. So now we know that we've gone since 1996. Now we're still seeing HPAI in the lower 48. You guys are seeing it in Alaska. We're seeing it all over the world. It helps to know where exactly it is that you're getting the detections from. So GIS coordinates, we all have cell phones and Garmin's and things like that. So you want to really make sure that you know where the detection is from, where it's at, because it's going to differ depending on where that animal is at. Tribal lands are sovereign lands, and so they would have a different response from the state or from the federal government. And then you would definitely want to be notifying tribal leadership of what was determined, what was found, and all of that, and then what type of response. So this is like from a government agency, whether it's a state government or the federal government, how then they would work with the tribal nation or the village or the community, the tribal community in that particular region. Okay. So just getting a little bit more specific, in October of 2023, you guys up in Alaska made the news, and it was very sad news because you guys had the very first polar bear. We've had other grizzly bears, we've had plenty of brown bears down here in the lower 48 that have succumbed to highly pathogenic avian influenza. But in October, there was a polar bear that was diagnosed, and they think that it probably ate a sick bird that was migrating in the fall, but it died. Okay, and so now we're worried because we know that we've had many sea mammals, we've had a lot of seals, we've had some walleye, we've had whales that have died, and so the thought is maybe those animals, are shedding it, and that's how the polar bear got it. There are many countries, as I mentioned, across the US that have it. And just recently, in the last month, the very first penguin on Antarctica was diagnosed with HPAI. So now we know we've got it on every continent in the world. HPAI is everywhere. And so kind of what's going on about that is the US Department of Agriculture is working on a vaccine that they can start giving to domestic poultry that would help them, so that not as many animals would have to be euthanized or put down to try and prevent, future zoonotic transmission. So I know I'm getting short on time here, but I just wanted to summarize that all wild birds should be kept from domestic fowl. And certainly if you have an expensive pet bird, a macaw or parrots or anything like that, you don't want to have them outside. I know a lot of folks want them to go outside and fly around. We want to really protect those real expensive birds. But you know what? Any bird, because if it's yours, if it's your private animal, it means something to you. So we should be trying to keep our domestic animals, our domestic fowl from wildfowl. Understand that there is always going to be a zoonotic potential. So humans have to be aware that you can get HPAI. And I just read this morning that China has 3 new cases. Unfortunately, they were in children, all under the age of 8, and all 3 of them have died from highly pathogenic avian influenza. In 2008, I was in Egypt, and part of what I was doing was investigating because we had 218 deaths in Egypt. Everybody was like, that's a desert. It was, but people were dying from HPAI because of the wild birds that they had, and they were eating raw eggs. So that's always a potential. And any sick or like not healthy bird, or certainly a bird that's already dead, you should not pick it up and try to consume it, even cooking it. That's not a good practice. And you should be aware of harvesting wild eggs that they could be contaminated. So there again, want to practice that biosecurity, cleaning the eggs, cooking them well done, that type of thing. And just understand that many of our seals, our walrus, many of our sea mammals are affected with highly pathogenic avian influenza. They may not be looking like they're sick. A lot of them are, especially the large die-offs that we've had off the coast of Chile and Brazil. And like I said, now we know we're all the way down into Antarctica. So we just have to be aware that when we're harvesting those animals, that is always a potential that we could be getting ourselves ill with. So I just want to thank you for this time, and hopefully, Caitlin, that covered everything that you guys wanted me to. I know it was quick, but here's my contact information. Please feel free to send an email. I try to monitor that email box, but I will tell you I'm a busy veterinarian. And just thank you for your time, Caitlin, and I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Tolani, for that presentation and a crash course on HPAI and some things to look out for. I really appreciate that. Chuck, would you like to say some words here, and then we can open up the discussion?
Oh, sure. Great presentation. I learned a lot, but a lot of it was already stuff that I had known before. And I just wanted to make a maybe there's two things that we're dealing with here in the Seward Peninsula and in our region. It's not only HPAI, but it's also HABs, harmful algal blooms. They are here in our oceans, and a lot of the sea mammals and seafowl are affected. But the scary part is that HPAI and HABs, they exhibit almost the same or similar symptoms that HPAI does. So as far as telling people to cook the birds, if they fully cook them, HABs is not eradicated by cooking. That's a truly scary part, but we can't. We don't. How do I put it? Unless we can distinguish that they have HABs or they have HPAI, our default is don't eat the birds. If they look unhealthy or if they exhibit symptoms. That's the scary part about being in this region. The other side of that coin is we don't have any federal presence. Okay, in 2000, I think it was 8. I might be wrong, but we had the first suspicion of HPAI in our region. The federal government sent 22 agents here to collect samples and to test them on site. That was on the suspicion of HPAI. They're not here. We already have HPAI. We have confirmed cases here in this region, but there's no federal presence, none. We, at every meeting I go to and wherever there's a federal agency employee, I mention this to all of them, that we don't have, we're doing their job for them, okay? As a matter of fact, I just got an email like 10 minutes before this started saying that they're going to send me PPE to collect samples and to basically do their job for them, to send a bird in for testing and stuff like that. I have no problem doing it because nobody's here to do it for us. But The thing is, I'm not trained to collect samples, but you know, there's no federal presence. There's no veterinarians here. There's no fisheries biologists. There's no bird biologists. Nobody. I would like to reiterate that we are starting to see less seagulls on our beaches. Last year, myself and Gay Sheffield, well, I forgot what you call it, our sea grant biologist, myself and her, we went to a washed up whale that was dead, minke whale, and we necropsied it, and there were no seagulls on the beach, none. You know, usually when you cut up an animal, walrus, seal, whatever, for traditional use, there's 25, 30 seagulls hovering above you to wait their turn to get at the scraps. There were none. There was maybe one bird in a 30-mile beach from here to Cape Nome. So we know we have it here. Actually, it's been confirmed by the federal government that we do have it. It's getting worse. I just like to say that the veterinarian is right. My last statistics were 17,000 elephant seals in, I think it was Brazil, on the coast of Brazil. There, 17,000 pups died from HPAI. And that was 90% of their pups born that season. I have been trying to educate and to let everybody know in our region that, if you see a bird that is sick, don't touch it. Unfortunately, we don't have money to fly to everywhere and collect the sample. But all we request for them to do is to document it, either take a picture and the location. At least we'll have that statistic. Unfortunately, we can't test it because of we don't have money for them to send the samples in through the airline, and it's really not safe to do it anyway. So we're kind of stuck in a crux because we have HPAI and we have HABs, and they exhibit similar symptoms, and we don't have the money to test for either one. So, and again, I'm asking, where is the federal government? We don't have any agents here in town or in our region collecting samples and testing for HPAI, or even a monitoring system for HABs in our ocean. So I'm kind of scared to see what this spring is going to bring, and if we'll actually have birds, and I guess the really frustrating part is, as a subsistence hunter and a resident of this region, it's like watching your world just disappear. That's literally how it feels. So I hope my presentation was helpful, and I do hope that you guys get the word out that this stuff is bad. God forbid it becomes a human pandemic. It's worse than COVID. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck, and thank you again, Tolani. I did have a couple of just like anecdotes to add. The state of Alaska is the only state where spring and summer harvest of migratory birds and their eggs is legal under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so thank you for talking about safe handling practices, thinking about, going out and harvesting eggs and then making sure that your gear is clean before you go to the beach, where maybe the seals are hanging out, and talking about the effects on other wildlife other than birds. And again, Chuck here is a member of the Alaska Migratory Bird Co-Management Council, so thank you for your time here. And I was wondering if either of you maybe have an idea if climate change is maybe exacerbating the avian influenza rates or severity or the spread, to other animals or marine mammals in particular.
I can answer that. A definite yes. Because in 2018 and 19, we had our biggest heat, you can call it a heat wave. But that was when we saw a lot of birds that were dead on their nests. And it's there's just no response from the federal government, period. We've let them know that this stuff was happening. It's, what can you do? We're already hamstrung by, a budget that is barely enough to have a meeting, and let alone try to monitor what's happening in all of our region. I'm speaking as somebody from the AMBCC, and we don't have the money to monitor all of it. Both of the, or I mean, HPA is just one of the things that we have to contend with. Also, the regulations about managing our resources, like the birds that we hunt, and we just don't have the funds to do all of that. But you're right. But I will say that yes, climate change really does affect how much what do you call it? What the hell am I trying to say? Well, let's just say climate change does affect the severity of HPA in birds. That's what I believe. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a veterinarian like Tolani, but the things we see in the birds, that's a telltale. So I believe so.
So Caitlin, I'm gonna just offer up my 2 cents, more from a scientific standpoint, and world traveler and scientist. I think that even more so than the climate change is the two-legged component. So we know that a lot of these viruses recombinate, they recirculate, they reform in areas where there is dense populations, because all of these viruses have to have a host that they are feeding from, that they just like bigger organisms, these viruses have to have food. They've got to have something to feed them. So when we look at population sizes, and now I'm going to talk about two-legged population sizes, because if you go back to that initial slide that I had that had all the different circles and it showed humans and all the different animals, as that human population size increases, it allows these viruses to have more of a population to feed off of and to recombinate and to what we call antigenic drift and viral shift. They will do more species and more to go into too. So then as you stress the environment, so now is where we bring in climate change, the animals themselves are stressed because temperatures are higher, our environments are different because we have more two-leggeds going out and taking up the land that normally these animals never saw humans, right? And as those cortisol levels rise in any species, whether it's two-legged, four-legged, finned, feathered, scaled, as those cortisol levels increase because of the stress, whether it's from a non-native species, so we can start getting into invasive species, we can look at climate change from temperatures rising, from the algal blooms like Chuck was talking about, all of those stressors that are happening in the environment of that animal, where it is at a place where normally things were nice, things were quiet, they were quiescent. Cortisol levels in the body were nice down here. As cortisol is low, your immune system is nice and high, right? Because our body is not being stressed. We don't have all these extra things adding on to it. So as you start changing things in that environment, so as people, the human populations keep increasing, people need to go out, they're going into places they didn't normally go to, that causes stressors on the animals. Those stressors cause those cortisol levels to rise. Now we see animals that are more susceptible and will have clinical signs or may not have clinical signs. So that's where, from a scientific standpoint, I think they're all intermingled. One does not, you know, it's not, we can't put the pin on one and say it's just that, and if we just got rid of that one thing, it would solve the situation. I think that the whole earth is part of the problem. What do? We make a change wherever we can, and I think that's the biggest thing. We do our best, you know, we try to decrease emissions, we try to go out and not cause too much more, you know, damage. We try to clean our seas. We, you know, it sickens me when I see, you know, floating masses of plastic and stuff, and knowing all the damage that causes to our sea animals and sea populations. So I think it's multifactorial, sorry, that is really a reason. And I think that we as two-leggeds need to understand that we're a component of that, and just kind of do our best that we can.
Thank you for that, both of you. I'd like to open it up here to anyone who's in the audience participating, if we have any questions or comments.
I'd just like to say something. I totally agree with what Tolani has said. But I think for me personally, that's long-term thinking. For me, the short term right now is to make sure that everybody's safe. And the only way we can do that is through monitoring. We don't know if these birds have HPAI. We don't know if they have HABs, but we do need to know, because we have people that actually go out and hunt them because they have nothing else. They have to hunt birds to eat. And we don't have backyard farms or anything like that. And the other part about that is, you know, what you were describing about the two-legged part. Birds already do it. They congregate on cliffs by the hundreds of thousands. On my hometown island, there's 4 million seabirds, and you know, God forbid that HPI gets there, they're going to be gone, because they're all communal. And as far as climate change, you know, right now we should be focusing on monitoring and ensuring that people have the most up-to-date information about where they are, and or where HPI is, and if it's in the birds, because we can't wait for people to quit throwing out plastics or, you know, do trash. I'm all for that, but I'm also trying to make sure that everybody is safe to eat seabirds, or they have the most information necessary to be the safest when they are doing that. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I see we have a hand up here, Joanne. Hi, welcome.
I'm a student at Anoka River School.
Hello.
I'm a student at the Anoka River School, and one time when me and my dad and family were hunting, we found three dead geese. They were flopping around in the grass. We realized they were sick and we threw them out into the river. I had to go and wash my hands really good because I was the one who grabbed those geese. This was like a year ago.
Thank you for sharing that story. And as Tolani said,
Yes.
oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to tell Joanne that in the future, Joanne, if you have the opportunity or if you see any sick birds like that, I would ask you to not throw them in the water. It might be better. I mean, what we try to do is incinerate them. I realize that you and your dad couldn't, but it might be better to just try and bury them or something like that, because part of throwing them back into the water is the other animals that then eat on their carcasses. That's where they get sick. So we kind of have to think about all of that, that our little effects, just like Charles was talking about, right now we say, well, yeah, we don't want to throw plastics out in the ocean. There's so many, but we have to start, and we will make our differences little by little. And if we do have people that have to eat birds, that's all they've got, that's why I said, 165 is your best friend. That if you can get your meat proteins, anything to reach 165 degrees with a thermometer, or well cook it, make sure that there is no blood, there is no running parts of the egg, those types of things. 165 degrees, you can eat those animals, you can eat that protein, but that will inactivate that virus. So I think there's a lot of different things we can do right now to help that will make a difference in the long run.
Awesome. Thank you all. We're getting close to the hour. Do we have any last questions before we have a couple updates here to share with you all? And thank you again for students from the Anoka River School. It is great to see you all here and to see you all participating and speaking up. And we're seeing a lot of really good resources here in the chat. So I'll make sure to copy these down and I can send out a follow-up email with all of these resources and more to each of the participants that are here today. All right, so just some updates from the Tribal Resilience Learning Network here. We are planning a land and climate work session, which is going to take place in Bethel, April 30th to May 2nd. This work session is going to address climate change and the impacts in regard to making land planning decisions and land stewardship within our tribal communities. The outreach that we're doing right now for participants is limited to tribes, tribal staff, village corporations, city leadership, etc., that are within the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta area or the Bethel region. So if you know anyone or young adults age 18 to 25 that are in the Bethel region and surrounding area who would be interested in talking about climate change, planning and land issues, please forward them this application. Here it is again. Here's a QR code. If you're tech savvy, you can use your phone to scan the QR code and it'll pull up the application. These applications are due March 22nd, which is 2 days from now, but the application is really quick and simple. If you have any questions or issues, please feel free to email our teammate. Her name is Tess, and this is her email here at the bottom of this slide. And then to close out, there's some big funding that's out right now. The National Coastal Resilience Fund, which is for communities along the coast anywhere in the nation. America the Beautiful Challenge, and these two fundings are huge pots of money. And then I really wanted to highlight the Tribal Wildlife Grant that is out right now. Chuck, you had mentioned wanting to do sampling for HPAI, and the Tribal Wildlife Grant is eligible for a number of different projects, including planning for wildlife and habitat conservation, management plans and actions, laboratory and field research, hiring staff, as well as getting field survey monitoring and equipment, habitat preservation, and also public education. And again, Chuck, as you had pointed out, you know, the federal government maybe isn't stepping up to protect our bird species as much as we'd like to see. So this grant could enable, you know, the tribes to take that stewardship into their own hands. And for all, oh, go ahead.
I just want to say that I'm not worried about the birds. I'm worried about my people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
This, it's not that I want to do the sampling. I don't want to. I don't want to put myself in danger. I could catch this and die from it, but there's nobody else that's going to be, or that can do it, you know? The federal government's not doing it. And as far as the protecting wildlife animals, of course, that's my job. But my first and foremost job is trying to keep the people in my region safe, and that's my biggest priority. So, you know, when I talk about all of this, I'm not talking about trying to protect the wildlife. I'm talking to try to protect our people, and that's a distinction that should be made everywhere. You know, and I realize that a lot of the federal agencies, they're, you know, focused on protecting the wildlife. I'm all for that, but who's there to protect my people? You know, that's the frustrating part. Okay.
Yes, thank you. Protecting our ways of life, right? And so for each of these grants, the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, which again is my employer and Tolani works with us, they have a grants team now. And if you would like to submit a proposal to any one of these grants and you would just like someone to help review it or any kind of technical assistance, they're available to assist. And their lead for the grants team is Megan Hawkins, and this is her email right here below. You can also feel free to email me if you have any questions about that. And one more announcement, we are planning a youth camp this summer. Here's a save the date. We will have more announcements and information out about this soon in the coming weeks. The camp takes place in July, so there's still plenty of time to look out for the application and get more information. We are getting close to the hour, and this is just a huge discussion. We could probably take all day. But really just thank you to our presenters and thank you to everyone who made it here today and for sharing your resources in the chat. I'll be sure to send out a follow-up email.